Yo, what's up? It's Jimmy on from Glitchy Thumbs. We're making characters, we're making games the glitchy way. In today's episode, we have character 3.4. This one's going to be somewhat of a complex character, at least that's how I remember it. This took me some time to actually figure out, but the character is actually pretty cool. Definitely check out all my other videos if you haven't already. I've been trying to make as many characters as possible. I guess it's just been my new favorite thing to do. I get to make all these characters and then come up with some game mechanics and see what I come up with throughout the entire process. Definitely check those videos out. You'll probably find some good nuggets if you've been watching my videos. You get to learn some cool stuff and just be entertained with all the things that I talk about and all the things that I do with Blender and BuildBox. Check out both and let's get to the video. Character 3.4 is going to be this turtle, goofy looking derpy guy. I don't have a name yet. We just know he's a turtle. I really like this character. It was probably one of the first that I thought was a really good sketch that I did that was not abstract, but more so of a real character based on an actual sea animal. It was a turtle. I don't know why I was thinking of turtles during that time, but it looks pretty cool. I actually like the way he looks. Let's see how I created it. Started with a plane, scaled it down, placed it at the bottom of the character, extruded the right vertices all the way to the right side, way past his head so that we can include the entire body, and then extruded left vertices all the way to the end of the tail. This one you can actually tell what the body parts are. That's the cool thing about it. Make multiple loop cuts on the right side. I'm just eyeballing everything, trying to get all the edges to be the same width, and I do the same for the left side with the multiple loop cuts. Select the vertices at the top, extrude all the way to the top near the top of his head, and then do multiple loop cuts on this top portion of the plane. I'm just trying to get all the quads to be around the same size. That looks pretty good. Around the reference where the outline is, there's a lot of dead space. You can pretty much delete all those quads or squares, whichever makes sense to you. I select all these faces on the right side near his head. I'm not sure why I selected some of them because they were actually covering the left arm, right arm, left arm, same thing, depending on how you look at it. Oh, I get what I was trying to do. I'm actually just going to model half of the character. We didn't really need those squares on the left arm. Think of it like a side view. We're going to create a 3D model. We technically can mirror the other half to the other side. That's why I left out that arm, because we only need one of the arms to actually create the shape. We definitely need the head, the shell, one of the paws, and the tail. Just mirror the rest of it on the other side and it will be pretty much the same. That's how my thought process was during this time for character 3.4. The turtle, Derpy Turtle. Derpy Turtle. This might be the character's name, Derpy Turtle. Not really a name, but just more so characteristics that I see. We definitely got to delete some of these faces, move these vertices closer to the outside of the right arm. We still have that little crevice that I need to fill. I'll have to figure it out at some point, but we're just going to get rid of all these squares or quads wherever it's not touching the outline of the turtle. It's pretty self-explanatory what I'm doing. You just align as you go. In specific areas, if you feel like you just need to knife into it, you can also do that. And that's perfectly fine. I definitely could have just knifed through the entire shape. That's okay too. There's really no right or wrong way to do it. Just go with the flow, however you feel that works in your creative flow. You can see I'm just knifing into things. I started integrating that more as I noticed that I was extruding all the way this time for the plane. We have a lot more dead space. Things I think of is using the knife and also deleting the faces. So those were the two things that were on my mind on how I was going to create the mesh for this character. We still got to fill out this little crevice. We just need to select those vertices and then press F to fill. That definitely works. We just create the feet or paws later on. He actually doesn't have legs. I just realized that he just has 2 arms. So that's funny. I don't know if I actually gave him legs then. I forgot how the final character looked like. We'll see if I actually gave it some legs as well. I knifed where the arm is. That makes sense. I left a little crevice on the left side near the tail. This part, I guess I was deciding what I should do. This area is like part of the body, so you can't really remove those faces. I actually filled it back in because when we actually create the character, we can just pull out those edges and that will make much more sense. Right now, everything's super flat. You can't really tell what I'm going to be doing until later on when we're able to pull out the different edges. You just have to visualize it like I was doing during this time. Like I have an idea of how I'm going to be creating the character, But in 3D, it's a little bit different because there's an extra Z space. It's not only in the X and Y. For the head, we could just delete most of these faces, just knife around the outline. If you need to make some vertices, you can also subdivide. It's easier to cut into. This is how my process was for creating character 3.4, the turtle. You just delete faces and then knife the rest. Pretty self-explanatory. By the way I'm doing it, super simple. That's how I remember it. I remember things in patterns because that's just much more simpler to remember, also to execute during my workflow. It works the way I'm doing it. I haven't really had any issues doing it this way. It makes everything much more cleaner. We get a pretty good 3D model doing it this way because we actually have an outline that we can follow. So it actually makes sense. If we need to adjust the vertices, we can just move them around. You see, this is actually pretty good for the plane so far. It's super flat, it's 2D. We're going to be using this to create the 3D model. You can definitely see there's a lot of improvements in my workflow. If you've been watching my previous videos, to get to this point took a lot of time. I was still trying to get familiar with Blender itself. I wouldn't say it's hard. It just takes some time to just remember where all the hotkeys are. Also trying to think about the different geometries for each of the characters and how you're going to create them. It's a lot of creativity actually when you think about it. Like I definitely need a reference to create something. I can't just go in and put something together with a blank cube or a blank plane. I guess my mind doesn't work like that. Possibly in the future as I make more characters, maybe I'll start to do that as a fun, creative thing to do. I lost my train of thought. Anyways, we're going to use this plane and extrude to the right on the y-axis. Delete the middle faces. I switched to studio and material to get it back to a more solid gray color. It's just easier to see for me. This looks pretty good for half of the turtle. Actually, he's a dinosaur in a sense. Turtle dinosaur. Dino Turtle. We would call him Dino Turtle. Dino Turtle is the name for character 3.4. If you have a better name, leave it in the comments. I like Dino Turtle. It's a mixture of a dinosaur with a turtle shell, but he only has 2 arms. This character is cool though. I like him. We apply all transforms to zero everything out. Apply the quick origin, get the cursor in the middle. Apply the mirror modifier, checking the y-axis, select everything, move it left or right, depending on where the 3D model is. Sometimes it's being overlapped, so you can't see the other side. If you move it to the right side or the left side, you'll be able to see the other half. Just get it as close as possible for the width that you want. This is the one I chose. Go into X-ray mode, select the middle vertices, turn clipping on, and then pull them together, and they'll connect in place in the middle. Now we have this somewhat 3D model of character 3.4 Dino Turtle. Now I have to figure out how I'm going to create these arms, but we need to move it to a new collection first. Move it to a new collection, character 3.4, rename it to the body. Now it's time to create the arms. From here, I'm actually visualizing how the arm is supposed to be. There's supposed to be some sort of crease at the bottom. That's why I left that portion alone earlier instead of cutting it out. Now we have to select these faces where the arm is. So you can just select all of them in that area. You don't have to worry too much about it being aligned to the outline. We can always move the vertices. If I extrude these faces, you can see that's how the arm is going to be. In the 3D space, it's kind of like sticking out, and we have to create that geometry around. But we need to make it curved later on with some curvature. Right now, everything just looks a little boxy. That's okay. The way I did it was select these outside top vertices, turn the target wheel on, and then wield those vertices together to the vertices on the right. That way it actually connects that boxy area. Now it's actually not as boxy, has a little bit of curvature. We can actually adjust that later on. I turn off target wheel so that our vertices don't connect to the other vertices. Now we have to actually create the tail portion. I think this is the tail portion. I mean, I'm selecting it. I'm extruding this out. We're going to be doing the same thing. The top vertices, turn on target wheel, connect it to the vertices on the left side, closest to the body. I accidentally selected the wrong vertices, so that's why there's a little weird area in the middle because I pulled it in from the arm. Now we can pull these in, and that gives us a nice curvature. I'm telling you, it's a lot of visualization for this character. We had it super flat. I don't have like side views and front views. I just drew one sketch, which is normally okay, but a lot of people use 2 views. They use the front view and then the side view. That way you can understand where to create your 3D model from the front view and the side view, but I was too lazy. I'm not gonna draw another side to the same character. I'll just visualize the rest of it, and then we'll just randomly come up with it in Blender. That's just how I do things. I used my one sketch, And then however I come up with it in Blender is however I come up with it. It actually turns out pretty fine. This is all part of the creative process. It's okay if it doesn't actually look good. As long as I think it looks good, we can actually understand that sketch is what I'm going after. The final character, if it turns out just like that, that's perfectly fine. Now, we need to grab these 3 faces where the bottom of the arm is. I was thinking of extruding it in, but that doesn't actually pull in the arm itself. Instead, I'm grabbing it using the green cursor to move it towards the character. That actually doesn't work either. I'm trying to figure out the best method to do this. So I'm extruding it again, but this time pulling it closer. I think I'm extruding it. It's either grab or extruding, one of those. There was a little weird face right here. Like I said, this was actually pretty difficult at the time to figure out, so bear with me as I look at this video. You would think it makes sense, but then when you actually do it, it doesn't turn out right. So then you have to make a decision on which way you want to approach this. I'm actually grabbing, again, pulling it in. That way we have this little crevice on the inside where the arm is. I turned on target wield to actually wield the vertices in, so that way we don't have these inner vertices that's going to affect our UV unwrap later for our UVs. I undid that. This part is actually pretty tricky because there's a specific way I wanted to do it. I wanted that part to be in the back. That way we have the arms sticking out, but I didn't want this curved part connected like that. So what I did was select these outside vertices and then extruded out another face. That way we have the arm facing us with these additional faces. On the inside, wherever there's a dent of some sort, I deleted that face. Select these 4 vertices so we could fill in this face for the quad. That's how I kind of wanted it. On the inside, we could delete these faces. We pretty much don't need it. So you can select these 4 vertices so that we can fill it in. It requires some critical thinking to see how you like it. You gotta be super creative on how you want your shapes. You gotta look at it from different perspectives, different views to see if it actually looks good the way you imagined it. At the bottom, I got rid of this triangle so I could fill it in with a square. This top area is a little bit weird. We can actually wield this to the vertices on the inside. That's how I kind of like fix things. There's probably a better way to do it, but that was my method. Since we pulled this vertex in, we have this little dent. We're going to do the same thing. Extrude a vertex to the left so that we can create this like invisible edge, and then we're able to create a square and just fix it as best as I can. You guys understand what I'm doing. This is exactly how I wanted it, with the middle part and the inside, and then we have the arm and the tail sticking out just like that. We'll add some curvature later. That would actually look pretty good. But the bottom of the arm, we need to create these little hands. Select all these vertices, extrude out, do a loop cut so it's easier to align our vertices. We can actually knife into it. I selected these faces in the middle and then subdivide. Did the same thing the other side of the arm, but I actually undid that and decided to select all these vertices that we're using for the arm. It just makes more sense to just subdivide the entire thing instead of just doing it in the middle. This gives us much more vertices to work with. If you do it this way, you can adjust the number of cuts at the bottom. I did that with 2 just to see how it looks like. I'm just going to keep it at 1. We don't need that many vertices. That's just going to make much more things for us to unwrap later on. Now we can select this dead space for the areas around the hand. Just align the vertices as best as we can, filling in things as you go. This isn't going to be perfect. It's just an idea that I'm trying to get through as best as I can. I'm deleting some faces in X-ray mode, so you can't really see what's going on. Now everything just kind of looks boxy. It doesn't even look correct, to be honest. But trust me, towards the end, it'll look much, much better. Everything just doesn't look right in the beginning. That's just how it is. But as you progress in creating your character, you'll realize that it actually turns out pretty well. And this character was super difficult for me to figure out, actually. There's just a lot of parts you have to think of. That's why I'm deleting all these faces. We're mirroring to the other side, but the hands aren't supposed to be connected. So I'm actually removing those hands and recreating the areas that we deleted. I'm possibly making the hands separate instead of extruding it. That's why I deleted it, but now we have this empty space and I need to fill it in with some geometry. It's tricky to actually fill everything back in. I should have actually thought about that early on before creating extra faces for the hands, but that's actually no problem. Now that we have the arms filled in again, I actually decided to use a separate plane. It just makes more sense. The hands is actually supposed to be pressed onto the floor. It's not supposed to be a side view like that, so we can't really create the hands unless it's separate. We join it together later on for the final. That's why I used a separate plane, because this is going to be easier to follow the outline. This hand's a little bit unproportional. So that's as best as we can do. Same thing, plane process, extrude it all the way so they can get all around the outline, and then do some loop cuts so that your faces and all the edges are aligned and the same size. You have a bunch of vertices that you can work with. Delete the dead space around your hands, delete the faces, knife into it, whatever works. Those two have been working for me. You can see we're getting a nice hand shape so far. Doing it this way. We're going to be using a solid color anyways. I'm not really using textures just yet still. Complex textures. I should look into that process. It's just not on my radar at the moment. I got a whole bunch of other things to do. This is just how I'm going to continue to do it. Everything's working at the moment. I don't need to change anything other than making sure I talk and narrate for all these characters. Try to play a little catch up so I can voice over the current characters that I'm working on. That's going to be pretty cool. The hands are actually pretty simple. It's very small, so it's not really an issue on what you do other than following the outline. Once you have this hand, you can always duplicate it and reuse it. For the hands, we weren't able to loop cut into everything. That's why you see at the bottom. I forget the actual reason. I heard it before when I was watching all these videos, but it slips my mind when I don't write things down. We're just gonna stop here. Where do we leave off? So we have the paws. When we do loop cuts, sometimes they don't go right across to the other side. I'm still trying to figure out why that happens. What I normally do is just subdivide by selecting two vertices. You subdivide between them to get the extra vertex. And then you can just knife through those different vertexes if you want to create your own custom loop cut. I don't know how else to explain this, but that's how I do it. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I get pretty good straight edges from that. That's all I really care about. As long as everything is like a quad, I'm just going to be using solid color over my textures anyways. It's going to perfectly wrap around the 3D mesh. Once we're done with that, go to side view, extrude in the y-axis, pull out just about half. That's what I normally do. Delete the middle faces, apply all transforms, apply quick origin, go into x-ray mode, select these middle vertices, add a mirror modifier, check Y. Actually, the order was wrong, but you actually select all the vertices so that you can align the 3D model as close as you can. This gives us half the 3D mesh. And then you go into X-ray mode, select these middle vertices, check clipping, and pull them together, and they'll join the middle vertices into one place. Move it to the character 3.4 collection, rename this to feet or paws, pretty much the same thing in terms of this character. We're just going to place it on the right side because we're going to mirror it to the other side later on. We need to fix the body because this area looks a little bit weird. Also, we need to create our own version of the arms. Since I don't have a front view of character 3.4, Dino Turtle, we have to visualize it in our head to see how it will turn out. I mean, that's how I normally do my characters. I mean, I could make it a little bit easier by drawing the front view, but I'd rather not spend that time on that. We're going to be making a 3D model anyways. I'd rather spend my time on that because we can actually use it in a game mechanic. You got to pick your time wisely if you're utilizing everything that you're doing with most of your time. In the past, I would spend a lot of money to create different designs, different characters, and do all the coding with like devs. Since I'm going to be doing everything myself, that's where I got to spend time. I'm not really trying to spend as much money as I did before creating games. I'd rather just learn everything myself. I definitely can do it. It might take me a little bit more time, but then again, I'm actually building up my skill set. That skill set will last me for a pretty long time. I'd rather just focus on that nowadays. It's just much more fun to build things yourself. Otherwise, you lose the creativity of doing it on your own. When you do it on your own, you actually learn a lot of different parts of game development. You're actually coming up with the character, coming up with the backstory, coming up with the design, coming up with the 3D model, coming up with the game mechanic, enemies, the level system, the progression, the revive system, the add system, pretty much everything. I'm actually challenging myself to do that. This is a new year. I can't keep all the stuff that I did in the past, that was done in the past, but I want to do something in the present. That's why I'm doing as many characters as I can to see how many games I can actually make. It's both for fun, like a passion project actually, but also I'd be lying if it wasn't for the money. Everyone needs to get paid. Everyone needs to eat. We'll just see how all these characters turn out, and whatever I come with is whatever I come up with. I think the process is pretty cool to see, being able to document everything from start to finish. Not many people do that. I definitely understand. It's a lot of work, but at the same time, I kind of like it. This is part of my content creation journey. It's introduced into this world. I think we're moving in that direction. I just think it's pretty interesting to me if I actually get it to go the way that I have it envisioned in my head. We'll just get to that point and see what happens. That's pretty much been on my mind. We're fixing this middle area for the arms. I selected these 4 faces, moved it up. You can see it creates this nice little crease. You can see that we were able to create kind of the arm doing that, but I actually undid that. I decided to change my mind, selected these 2 faces and went into x-ray mode so I can see where I'm actually placing these faces so that they're aligned to some of the other vertices. This is where it gets pretty experimental for the character. I'm gonna have to decide what I want to do based on how we pull in the faces. Then we'll be able to create the curvature later. There's a little bit of trial and error and experimental, of course. If you're creative, you'll be able to definitely come up with the solution. I delete these faces. We don't need that. I think those are extra faces, maybe not. Anytime there's a hole or something we need to fill, you can just select those 4 vertices, then press F to fill it in. You'll always have the faces you need and vertices and edges, and you can always move that around. Don't be afraid to actually experiment with your designs. It looks a little bit blocky right now. That's just how it is. Not everything's gonna be perfect in the beginning. I know I've seen some incredible designs on the internet. They definitely put an insane amount of hours, because I can tell. I feel like I put many hours into this and I'm still just scratching the surface. Most likely I have a lot of ways to go. Plus I have a lot of characters, so this is going to be fun to actually create them all. Hopefully I can. We'll just see how the process goes as I come up with different gameplay for each one of them. That's definitely going to change throughout the process. I really don't know how it's going to go. I just go with the flow, go with what my gut tells me, go with what my intuition tells me. That's pretty much what I'm going to be doing. For the feet, we need to add a mirror modifier so we can mirror it to the other side. That just makes everything much easier to do half of the work and then just focus on the most important things about character 3.4. Dino Turtle, or was it Turtle Dino? No, it's Dino Turtle. Dino Turtle is actually a pretty cool name. That might be a game that I would probably come back to. I actually really like this character. Super unique. 2 paws, and then it dragged the butt area. For this front area, since we pulled it in earlier and we were able to create some sort of crease, I selected these 2 faces and moved it back. And that gives us a nice flat chest area that gives us some depth to our arms. You can definitely see it now, how I'm going to be creating the curvature for the arms. This actually took some time to think on what I wanted to do, but I'm glad I figured it out. Now I'm able to show it in video form. For the back parts, I select these vertices in the back, turn on target wield, and I just wield it to those vertices on the side. That way the tail is connected to that area and we don't have a boxy area and we don't have to worry about that. I forget if I added extra feet to this character. It looks like I'm fixing this area. I don't like how there's this little dent. Whenever there's this dent in my mesh, I just extrude a straight edge, creating a vertex that's floating in the air. Just selecting these 4 vertices so that we can create a front face. Now we have to figure out how to create the feet. At the bottom, select these vertices to fill it in. That creates our triangle, and then you can dissolve. I thought you could dissolve it to create our quad, but that didn't work, so I just deleted those faces. You just select these 4 vertices and fill it in to get our quad. In the back, we have that triangle. For this area, just delete that face and then extrude an edge to create that floating vertex. Select these 4 vertices, fill it in to create a quad, knife down the middle to create a triangle. From here, you can select these 4 vertices and fill it in. That gives us a nice sharp area for the connection of the foot near the tail area. Just wield any vertices that you think should not be there, like I did with the tail right here. That just keeps everything super organized for character 3.4. You could even wield some of these vertices in the back if you wanted to. You could leave them, you could wield them together. It's entirely up to you. Sometimes I change my mind, sometimes I don't. Here I actually changed my mind because I might need those extra edge loops to pull out later. If we actually join them, we would need to create more of a curvature somehow. It's better to just leave that for the back part, which I guess would be the thigh. I select these faces and extrude to the right so we can actually create more of like a leg. I did the same for the front arm, extruding it out. The felt like a little bit was missing. The right side of it is a little bit curved versus the left side, which is like a straight boxy area. We need to have some sort of curve for both sides for it to make sense. That's why I extruded that area, wielded the top vertices into the side, and wielded the bottom vertices into the side. So that gives us somewhat of a curvature to the arm. You won't really be able to tell how this looks later on because we're just going to be shading smooth. But it actually turns out pretty good. We'd have to do the same for the hind legs or the thigh, whatever it's called. We wield that together, gives it a little bit more curvature. We can pull out these middle vertices and start creating some sort of a shape for the arms and legs. Since I want it to be somewhat symmetrical, you can see that for the leg area, thigh area, there's like a triangle on the right side. We definitely need to create that on the left side. That's what I did. Extruding out the floating edge with the vertex, selecting these 4 vertices to fill them in to create our quad. Just deleting faces we don't need, filling it in with the same method of the 4 vertices and the quad. That's pretty easy to remember as a pattern if you're usually into stuff like that, or at least your brain works like that. You just remember certain patterns or certain simple steps. That's how I remember when I'm doing some minor adjustments to things. I try to think in triangles and quads. If you're creating a shape, just try to create a quad first, and then if you need to cut into it, always think of it as a triangle. Quad always has 4 vertices, 4 edges. Triangle always has 3 vertices and 3 edges. That's how you can easily remember it. The geometry around your character is pretty much created based on those 2 shapes. You just have to envision how that looks and just go with the flow. That's pretty much how I remember it. That's as easy as it gets. Of course, it's probably a little bit more complex than that, but I like to simplify my definitions of how things work. At the end of the day, as long as I finish my character, that's all that really matters, right? As long as we're effective within the day and being productive, whether it's 1%, 2%, 3%, we're still being somewhat productive and getting things done. That's what I'm doing for character 3.4, Dino Turtle. The leg part in the back was not part of the sketch. This is just something I felt like the character needed. I know I said it was pretty cool that there was just 2 paws and 2 arms, but that doesn't really make sense. I decided at this moment in time to actually create the extra legs. That would just make much more sense. A turtle has 4 legs. I mean, 2 hands, 2 legs, pretty much all legs or hands, however you see it. That's what I was doing here. Some of this, I try to keep it aligned and symmetric as possible. You can always knife into things if you want a specific curvature in a certain area. As long as you add vertices or edges where you can drag in and out, then you'll be perfectly fine creating any type of shape you want in Blender. At least for creating characters, that's how I do it. Since we already created the mirrored version of the hands or the feet, we can actually duplicate that and move it to the back. Since it's already mirrored, we'll be able to see it on both sides. The back foot, I decided to scale it down. We can just align this as best as we can. This is already starting to look pretty cool. You can see how I created the 3D model. It's super flat right now, but when we inflate it and pull out the edges, you'll definitely see that this is going to be pretty cool. I select the outside edges. I'm going to be doing an edge slide. Usually with the edge slide, there's going to be a bunch of dents into our character. I can definitely keep them if I wanted to. We'll get some sort of low poly design if we do that. Sometimes I don't like it and I decide to fix it. We'll see which ones I fix to remove some of these dents and which ones I don't. When we do edge slides, it creates a curvature around the different body parts. Again, you don't have to create the curvature if you don't want to, but I like to do it because it makes the character look a little less boxy and a little bit more round. Plus, every 3D model is rounded anyways, so it's a good practice to start doing that. When you go into object mode, you can actually see how your polygon or geometry looks like. You can see it's like a little bit of low poly based on different angles of where the light hits. We can definitely use those quads to fill in different textures if we wanted to create some sort of pixel art if we wanted, but that's not the focus for the character. The focus is just to get character 3.4 done as best as I can, just improve the look of this character, how I think it should turn out. I had to x-ray into this area at the bottom where the paws are. We've extruded that area and it's a little bit tight, but that's what we're working with. As I go through the character, we can start pulling out these edges in the columns to start inflating it a little bit, give it some curvature. You can see how Dino Turtle is actually turning out. It's actually turning out pretty good. I liked this character towards the end. I definitely remember this character. Towards the top, I thought this part looked a little bit weird. We definitely need to knife into the 3D model because the topology is a little bit weird here. It feels like it's missing like a straight line of some sort. That's why I knifed this area to fix it. That's what I normally do. I block things out, see how it looks, pull out the edges, and then fix it as I go, deleting any edges, any vertices. All right, where did we leave off? You definitely have to go around your character to see a bunch of these vertices and edges that you created. Try to fix them, at least envision how they should look and try to align everything. The way I see it is there should be a straight line to some of the vertices and edges. That's how I fix these dented areas in my mesh. I knife through them from vertex to vertex. You can definitely eyeball it to see how the shape should look like. At least that's how I think of it. Areas where there's like a triangle or a slant and that edge should not be there. That's when I delete them and create my quads, because that just makes much more sense. That's why you see me delete these edges, try to create my quads as best as I can. That way you can drag in any vertices to create the curvature much better. You just have to move around your shape to see where specific vertexes are supposed to be in the 3D space. That's how I normally do it. At least it makes a lot of sense to me to do it this way. I can actually see how my character looks like. I have an idea of how I want to create the topology. Just continue on with pulling out the edges by rows so we can create the somewhat inflated version of our character that creates the curvature, that creates the 3D model pretty much. It's not going to be perfect doing it this way. We're doing the edge loop one by one. There's going to be some indents into the 3D model that we don't like. That's perfectly fine. I changed my method from this plane method where we pull out the edges to the cube and subdivision surface modifier method. That actually changes how the character looks like for the future videos whenever I get to it. Our character is much more rounded, much more inflated, less of the ridges on the sides. But it was a good learning experience doing it this way. You can definitely create anything you want doing it this way. As you can see in object mode, it actually looks pretty cool if you have your art design like this in this low poly design. It's really up to you, like what your preference is based on the characters that you make. Of course, we're all going to be different. Art is subjective. You can't really say what's good or what's bad. It really depends how you see it, how other people see it. It's all a combination of everything. Even though some people might say it's not good, or even some people might say it is good, at the end of the day, if you were productive, if you were effective, if you got what you wanted to get done and you wanted to create this character like I'm doing with character 3.4 Dino Turtle, then that's what really matters, right? Like I was able to finish this character and create some sort of game mechanic with it. That was my goal. Anything else in between doesn't really matter. Any bad comments, any good comments, of course it's good to always get feedback, constructive criticism, just to know what people think. But all of that stuff really goes out the door as you make more characters, right? As long as you're progressing, getting better at each character, then these characters are just a stepping stone to something much bigger in your near future. At least that's how I think about it. That's what came across my mind as I'm creating character 3.4. Blocking out portion is usually where I have a whole bunch of ideas or thought process comes to my brain. I just ramble a little bit, but I think a lot of this stuff is super important to see where my thought process is. A lot of people want to get into somewhat game development They want to make their own characters. They want to make their own creations. So the thought process is usually left out by a lot of people on how they get to their characters, on how they create it and what they were thinking at the time they were creating. That's why I'm doing all of this. This is super important to me, but I think it's important that I put this out in the world so that people who are similar to me, I guess, who wanted to create their own characters, who wanted to create their own games, but they're kind of afraid to do it because they really don't know where to get started. Honestly, you can just start from the bare minimum and just work your way up like I did. If you've been watching all my videos, you'll know that that's kind of how I started on this character journey that I'm on, Blender journey, game dev journey that I started from the beginning again to see what I actually create from my own mind, from my own hands, from whatever I use that's available technology out there that I can use. I'm not going to try to learn something that's going to be way too difficult. It's going to take me a lot more time. I already know things and I might as well just use that knowledge and see what I can build off of it. We'll just go from there and don't put too much pressure on myself on getting it perfect. I'm just trying to get those creative juices flowing. We'll see where it goes from there. On this back area, you can definitely tell the topology is a little bit weird. Anytime I see a bunch of edges within a quad, I automatically think I should fix it. Just making it to a quad just makes more sense. That's how I think of it. There might be a right or wrong way. I don't know because I haven't really dabbled into the right or wrong ways. I just know that when you make games, it's better to triangulate them. That's like making everything into triangles, but you need to start with quads first to actually get to that point. So that's why I'm thinking of doing quads in the beginning. If I need to create triangles out of them, it would be much more sense that way. That's what I guess mostly that I've learned, other than everything else that I talked about in all my videos. I learned a lot of things here and there, just random points of my life. I'm always looking for a better framework to improve my own process. But you guys start putting all that knowledge and information to work, getting hands-on, and then just taking action on all the information that you learned. That's what I normally do. I learn a whole bunch of stuff, and then I try to use all that information as much as I can that I remember and try to create something cool. And then I explain what I'm doing is because this just makes more sense. It's easier to go back and rewatch all my videos if I actually narrated everything on everything that I did per character. Even the things that I missed out on, I'll be able to see it again and I re-narrated it and I'll be able to have that reference point that I can always refer to. If I need to look for something that I did in the past and I just kind of forgot about it, that's why these videos are important to me and my journey. So it's cool to actually be able to put it out there. I'm getting a little bit more thorough trying to fix this tail area and the back legs for character 3.4. I'm trying to create it as rounded as possible, as best as I can. I just wanted this character to come out really much better than a lot of the other characters that I made, just to see how much did I actually learn throughout this process. It actually looks pretty cool. Now that I'm looking at it, it looks like an actual character in comparison to my previous characters. It's very symmetrical this time, so we don't have any odd shapes or out of the ordinary lopsided areas because we have the mirror on. Under the turtle, I was trying to pull in this bottom area so that we can have somewhat of a shell-like feeling to the bottom. A lot of this I'm just imagining how, I guess, a mixture of a dinosaur and a turtle would look. I mean, at least that's what I think of as the inspiration for this sketch, but I don't know what I saw when I made this sketch where my brain decided to put it down in Procreate, but it definitely looks like a mixture of a turtle and a dinosaur. All of this looks pretty cool already. We get to the feet. Anytime there's separate objects to a character, that's definitely adding on more time, but that extra time just makes it much better because you're creating a more high quality character. So that's another shape for us to do our edge slides and pull out our edge loops to create the curvature and inflate the 3D model. We have to do the same thing for the paws. So it's probably best to not duplicate the paws just yet because we're going to need to inflate them and create the 3D model anyways. That's what I did. I duplicated the inflated version first for the front and then moved it to the back, removing those previous feet. That just makes much more sense. But I always need a visual of what it should look like in the beginning. That's why I had it duplicated earlier on. I just like to visualize things in front of me to actually see it for the first time and then decide whatever I wanted to do along the way, because then I actually have some sort of visual presentation of what it looks like and what I can actually fix. Looking at it from the sketch view and in a 2D plane and in the reference, you think of it in a different way. You look at it when it's in 3D form. That's why it's just good to get hands-on and be experimental first, see what you actually create along the way. You're going to think of a lot of different things like I did that makes much more sense for the 3D model. This area at the bottom, I know this part was super tricky for me. It's like a little crevice. You have to kind of go inside the 3D model to fill it in, but also you have to see if this vertex is needed or not. That's something that was somewhat difficult to work with. You can definitely get through it if you just be patient, use X-ray mode to look where the vertices are, and then just align it as best as you can. I don't want to talk much about this area because it's just a few adjustments we need to do. We got majority of the 3D model actually. That was pretty much the important part of the blocking out portion of character 3.4. This brings us into UV Unwrap. The blocking out portion did take a lot of time to create the 3D model. Part 1 and part 2, there's 2 parts that I'm going to be doing a time lapse on based on what I narrated. About 3 hours in total, 1 hour for part 1 and then 2 hours for blocking out for part 2. If you're creating characters, it's going to take you some time to block it out because you're going to think of how you're going to create the character, you're going to block it out, and then you're going to pull out the edges to create the curvature and whatever in between. That's why it's taking a pretty long time, but also I'm a little bit more detailed now with my characters. I'm trying to make it as best as I can versus what I did before where I just did anything that I could to create the character. But now I'm actually focusing on trying to make it a little bit more high quality, I guess, or at least make it look as best as it can. Otherwise, I won't be learning anything or implementing any new changes to the way I work with my workflow. But yeah, now it's time for UV Unwrap to start giving this character some UVs so we can actually get to creating the finalized 3D model. It's raining outside, it's throwing my attention off, but that's okay. I'm trying to stay focused as best as I can. What we need to do is create a new texture. Definitely check out the last character 3.3, Spooky Ghosts. That was the texture for it. You should see the last video that I have out for Blender and Buildbox to see what I created with it. It's a pretty interesting game mechanic. It's probably one that you've played before, so definitely check that out and hit the like button if you haven't already. Support this video, support my channel. I appreciate it. A new texture is character 3_4_texture. Same naming convention as always. You definitely know by now. That's how I label everything. Just makes more sense. We're gonna have like a million characters, so you have to start labeling them now. Early on, that's what I decided to do. We go to UV sync selection. You can see there's a bunch of weird UVs with a bunch of weird topologies going on. I select this middle edge loop. This is what I normally select, and I mark that seam. From there, if you just kept it this way, we'll just have one large UV island that splits the character in half. You could just color it this way if you wanted to. That would make it easier, but I started to unwrap it individually in areas that I think should have a separate color. That's my thought process. If you start rotating the UVs in UV sync selection, you won't be able to select the entire island because there's no island selection in UV sync selection. That's why when I rotated it, it was only rotating these outside vertices that were selected. If you go out of UV sync selection and select everything, now you have a fourth selection to rotate everything based on islands. I have no idea what this little face or island is supposed to be from. I selected it, and then on the right side, I'm looking for that shape. Sometimes it's going to be inside of your character, so you might have to zoom in. And we definitely don't need this triangle face that's in the middle. So I just delete it. That removes it from our UVs. That's going to happen sometimes when you're creating your character. Be sure to look around, look on the inside. If you have a bunch of weird UVs, that might be the case. I think my previous videos, you can see that I had an issue with that. I forget which video actually, so you might have to go back to one of the videos. I'll find it. But I haven't really jotted down much for the previous characters that I worked on. I'm just trying to narrate everything as quick as possible, get all this content out, and then just see how everything works out. So that's my goal. Also to create as many videos as I can and utilize this time to narrate as many videos so I can play a little bit of catch up with all the characters that I've been working on. I'm trying to align this UV island as best as I can. I want it to be similar to my 3D model, which is facing left to right. That's why I mirror it to the other side. That way it keeps everything aligned. For the paws, same thing. Select the middle edge loop around the entire shape and mark the seam. We can actually stack this on top of each other because they're pretty much the same size. They're the opposite of each other. That way, when we fill in the texture, it'll just fill in the texture for both of the meshes based on that UV. If you want it to snap in place, just turn on snapping at the top with this magnet button. Select the vertex, and it'll snap to the closest vertex based on your UVs. That makes everything easy to align. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We also have to do the same for the back feet. They're pretty much the same size, so you can stack all 4 of them or all 2 of them together. Since they're going to be the same color anyways, we can just utilize that same position for the texture. That's going to be as simple as it gets for the body and the feet for the UVs. I also forgot to create the eye. We're not going to draw on the 3D model for the eye. We're going to create the eye with the cube, scale it down, add a subdivision surface modifier. You can change the viewport from 1 to 2. That's just going to give it a little bit more subdivisions, some more rounded shape. I like this better because it looks better applying a texture on top. It just wraps nicely over, I guess. Doing it this way, we have less vertices to work with to create the shape if we need to, or just align it in place. It still gives us that rounded sphere, which is pretty much every eye on most of my characters. I haven't really worked on like eyelids or indents into my 3D models just yet. I just have the eyes bulging out. It's just part of the design, I guess. I haven't really spent much time in trying to sculpt having the eyes within the face of the character. That would be pretty fun to do it to many of the future custom characters, I guess. Whenever I get to that point, maybe I'll consider it. Sculpting is just another thing that I feel like I've never really learned just as much yet. I'm just creating 3D models and then having separate objects put together. I haven't really dabbled much into sculpting. I feel like it's a little bit more detailed, a little more time consuming. I'm just trying to create as many characters as quick as possible, just getting my idea across based on the reference that I have. This way is working for me, so I don't really feel the need or the desire to look much deeper into sculpting. Maybe one day I will, when we get to that point in my game dev journey or Blender journey. We'll just see where this goes. With the eyes, we just need half of them. We need to delete half of these faces, selecting it in X-ray mode. We're really not going to see those UVs within the face of the character. That's why we delete them. They're just going to be hiding behind the 3D model anyways. We add a mirror modifier to mirror to the other side to create the other eye. We need to mirror the body object. That's how Blender knows to mirror half of the 3D model to the other side of the face of character 3.4, Dino Turtle. That name is really getting to me. I kind of like it. We'll see what I do with it. We need to rotate and align the UVs so that way the middle edge is always going to be in the middle. Scale it down and then just align 3 of these UV islands as close or as best as possible. Honestly, I try to do it as quick as possible because we don't have many UVs for each of the characters. I could put it into one texture file, but we haven't gotten to that point where I needed to do that. I'm just practicing the same steps over and over, creating a new texture and then doing our UVs separate for now, just to see how I would line it up. Just applying everything with a blank texture with the colors. Those 3 UVs are pretty much the UVs that I decided to do for character 3.4. That brings us into texture paint for character 3.4, Dino Turtle. In texture paint, we need to add a material for all these separate objects. You just select the same material that I've been using in the previous characters. This time we have to change it to the character 3_4 texture. That's what I normally do. Just select the other materials for the other separate object. We actually have a 4th separate object, which was the eye that we added. It's just not moved to the character 3.4 collection just yet. I moved it, renamed it to eyes, added the material, go to texture paint, starting with the eyes, choose a white color, fill it in with the paint bucket to give us a big white eye. Go into object mode, select the body, Go into texture paint, select the gray color, fill it in with the paint bucket to give us a gray color for the body. Go into object mode again, texture paint for the paws this time, or the front feet or the back feet. You just need to select one of the separate objects because we only have one UV that shares the same location on the texture. Whatever we fill it in right now would just be applied for all the feet. I tried the lighter gray this time. That's similar to the gray on the body, but that looks a little bit too light. Doesn't give any contrast. So I went with a darker gray so that the paws are a little bit dark, but actually it doesn't look good, I guess. So I sticked with the gray paws for now, the same color as the body. We're going to need to draw the mouth and I think somewhat of a nose on the 3D model. We need to make sure our face orientation is correct. We bring down the viewport overlays, check face orientation. If it's red, that means it's wrong. So we need to flip the normals, mesh, normals, flip. Make sure you selected all of your faces or your entire object with A in edit mode. Otherwise, you'll start seeing some of the character being red and some of the character being blue. That's going to give you a headache because then you have to flip each individual red face by selecting them, since there's only going to be a few. Otherwise, if you select all and flip, they're just going to flip the opposite of the color they are. But we just want it to be all blue. We need to do the same for the paws, making sure we flip them all to blue. Some of them are going to be red. You have to individually select them. And now they're all blue. Interesting, inside of the Dino Turtle, it's all red. I actually never looked inside of a character, so maybe all my other characters are red on the inside. I don't know, actually. That was the first time I looked at the inside. Usually we just look at it on the outside. Back to the eye, we need to create the pupil. Select the middle. We're just going to grab a black color, change it to the draw tool, increase the brush size, and just fill in a black dot. If the brush is a little bit too soft for you and you don't like how it's faded looking like this, go over to the top where the fall off is. The fall off is actually correct though, so I don't know why it looks like this, which is interesting. It's a little bit pixelated, not as round around the edges. Based on this, my observation is that our UVs were scaled down, so there's not much pixels to use for a high quality eye. That's why we have, I think, these ridges around the black pupil that we drew. At least that's how I think of it. If our UVs were much bigger, we can actually create a more rounder eye, similar to what the white color looks like. That's how I kind of think of it. If it doesn't really work on drawing on the actual 3D model, you can always draw onto the texture space on the left side. That's what I did instead. Just scaled up my brush a little bit, just pressed to create a round black pupil right in the middle. That's pretty much what the sketch looks like. He has a white eyeball with a small little pupil. That's pretty much our character. Now for the nose, we actually need to create these lines. His nose is super simple. It's just a bunch of lines. But if you think about it in a 3D space, those lines have to be one on one end and then one on the other end. In the sketch, since it's a 2D view, that's why you see there's two lines. You wouldn't actually do two lines on the same side. That's why I'm only doing one line. I'm trying to do it as straight as I can. It looks a little bit curved in the front view of the 3D model, but that's actually fine. Looks pretty cool, actually. For the mouth, it's going to be a straight line, and we need to connect it in the front as best as we can. If you want to fix those ridges, you can do so in the texture itself. That's going to be the nose and the mouth for the character. We're also missing this shell. What I thought to do was select the faces of this back area, and then you can extrude along the normals, or you can just press Shift D to duplicate those faces, then extrude along the normals. I dragged this shell up, and I guess I wanted to knife into it again to remove these sharp edges. The side of the shell is a little bit more straight. If you want the shell to be more 3D, right now it's like super flat, you can go to this area to select extrude. You want to extrude along normals. When you extrude the shape out, it'll just extrude based on the normals, and it creates this nice shell for character 3.4. Then we could drag this back down. Now we have this pretty cool shell that we created from the faces of the back. We just need to align it to the body of the character so that we don't have these crevices and holes. Go in X-ray mode. You can just move the vertices if you want, whatever's easier. A lot of this is all pretty much for visualization now because the sketch was only the starting point. Now whatever I create in 3D is whatever I create for character 3.4 Dino Turtle. Anything extra I add it's going to be very different. You can't really use the reference anymore. The reference was just there to start for the character. This turtle shell, we definitely need to unwrap as well. Go back to UV editing. We're trying to mark the seam down the middle. We need to align those UVs for the shell. And bummer, I think I forgot to save the texture actually. I switched back and forth between the UV editing and texture space. But something probably happened throughout the process because everything's all black again. Our texture usually starts with black. When this happens, that's me forgetting to save the texture. Now we need to recolor it in again. This is why I always start with the gray color anyways. If I started with a complex texture, I would have forgot to save it anyways. So you gotta start teaching yourself to save your textures earlier on. Otherwise, you're gonna get super angry that textures are gone. And I'm not entirely angry for the entire process because I'm just using gray colors anyways. It's just simple colors that I can't repeat the process over and over. It's not much of a big deal. For the body, we chose a light gray earlier on. For the eye, we chose a white color. For the feet, I chose a light gray. For the shell, we need some contrast. Choose a darker gray, either in the middle or more of a darker gray. But I think it's too much of a contrast when you have a dark gray with the light gray. It's got to be somewhat close in value. Back for the pupil, we need to fill in this black middle area. I guess I usually start on the mesh itself so that we get it directly in the middle. If you want a better circular pupil, you got to do it on the texture space. It just fills in much better with the brush. Doing it on the left side, you can see how this is much more rounded than how it looked when I drew it in on the right side. But we have to redo the nose and then redo the mouth, connecting the front of the mouth. I like that the nose is somewhat curved with the texture. I guess that's part of the character's style now. I like things that happen throughout the entire process. It just makes the character much more unique as it's being created. It's all part of the creative flow. For the shell, I wanted to fill in each of the squares or create some sort of line art on the shell itself. I was using the UVs as guidelines based on the edges that we see, just drawing with the black color, just doing the same thing on the other side. So we get a bunch of squares similar to what a turtle's shell would look like. Again, these are prototypes. It's not like it's being finalized. I know it looks pretty ugly right now. That's because we're just trying some ideas out. This isn't going to be final. Sometimes this happens in Blender. Like I said, there's like painting issues. Sometimes there's specks that show up when you're filling in color on your shape. For the front of character 3.4, Dino Turtle, you see a bunch of these black specks that show up. I could have just kept them actually. That just makes it a little bit more unique. It's like he has freckles of some sort, but you know, I like to keep everything clean, keep the solid color clean. I decided to remark the shell. We have a different UV for the outer shell, but also this inside part of the shell closest to the body. That's how I decided to mark those seams. Now we have 3 separate UV islands for the shell. When we separate UVs like this, we can actually select them on the right side in edit mode, either by selecting a face and pressing Ctrl L and it'll link all the nearby faces, or you can just select it individually like I am. Go to texture paint and fill it in with a darker color. Part of the shell was closest to the body of the character and it's not really touching a light area. So that's why that area I decided to make it a little bit darker for a little bit of contrast. Also, since our UVs are different this time, we need to redo the lines for the square parts of the shell. This is super rough. I didn't intend to keep it this way. It's just to get the ideas going. If I wanted to go back, I can always fix it for the polished version of the character. So the thing I did was I saved the texture with the shell design. It has these rough squares that I drew on the shell. And then I just filled it in again with dark gray color to get rid of the lines. So we have a plain shell now. And then I just saved that as well, renamed it as plain shell. That way we have 2 textures, one with the rough design that I put on it, and then one with the plain shell. That just makes it easier. If I need to revert to any of those 2 textures, I have it. We're just gonna end off here on texture paint, starting at texture paint part 2, and I'll continue tomorrow. All right, we're on the second part of texture painting for the shell. I decided to select these edges around each of the quads for the shell. I decided to bevel it by pressing Control B. If I pull it outwards, the shell turns into kind of like a spiky shell, a little bit all over the place. That looks pretty cool, actually. If you move it back and forth to get the bevel just how you want it, you can create this within the shell. I don't know how else to explain it, but you can create this bevel within the shell, as you see here. I should probably look at the definition, but I'm a little bit too lazy right now. All right, fine. I look at the definition. The bevel tool allows you to create rounded corners on geometry, an effect that smooths out edges and corners. Well, I'm guessing you're supposed to use it on corners, but I decided to use it on the shell. This might be a little bit easier to separate the UVs or even create an indent so that I can extrude the shape in where the bevel is. That way we can actually create geometry of the quads within the shell by just selecting these faces and then just extruding along the normals. That way we can actually have a pretty cool shell that's not hand drawn like how I did it earlier on in the video. That's the alternative if you want to create a nicer looking shell, if that's what you prefer. I like to do things both ways. I'll do it how I envision it in my head. The first way was just drawing it directly onto the texture, whether it's a nicely drawn one or taking the time to make better textures. This is the alternative. You just bevel the shell and then select the faces and extrude it out. This way it actually looks nicer aesthetically, of course. And that's why I wanted to show both ways. There's multiple ways you can do things in Blender. You just have to be creative and think it out with the tools they have available. That's what I decided for the shell. Now, I was trying to figure out how am I going to texture this. If I directly paint on it, that's what happens. That's pretty cool. To have some sort of pattern by just painting it. You can just take your time and paint on the textures slowly. I was trying to do it the fast way. Since we have those faces selected, I can just go into texture paint. I was just trying to fill in just the areas I selected by using the paint bucket, but it actually doesn't come out how I think it should come out, where we'll have more sharp corners. Those quads or squares would have been filled out nicely, but it actually doesn't turn out that way. I might have been doing it wrong. There might have been a better way to do it, but you know me, I'm trying to do things as quick as possible. However, I think of it at the time is how I'm going to be doing it. The area that we beveled, which is like within the crevices, I was trying to just paint that area with a darker color by just using the paint bucket, but that doesn't really work for some reason, which is very odd. I just think painting in Blender doesn't really work as best as it should. Most of the time, better to take it into something else like Photoshop or Sprite, because there's an Sprite add-on with Prima Base. I just went back to my original way of doing it. Even though we have this new shell with the bevel and the extruded squares, I just decided to draw my own squares as patterns within these edges. We have some nice guidelines now. But that's a helpful thing of using bevels in your UVs. It will give you some guidelines and you can just follow that to create a pretty cool design. The design I'm drawing here is just a pattern of a few squares. You can use whatever color you like. I used a light gray at the top and then decided to erase all of that, even though that looked pretty cool. I could have just did a mixture of black and gray as a pattern, but I used black to keep it consistent. I could always go back and redo this if I wanted to. I could even take this into Photoshop and just easily recolor those squares. You just have to start with something. I just wanted to see how this would look if I did use this into Buildbox later. You got to start experimenting how your character is going to look, especially with some prototype characters. This isn't final. I'm going to be changing this up, of course, if I do decide to come back to this. This is the pattern I decided to choose, where the black squares are spaced. In between, you have the light gray squares. That gives it some uniqueness to character 3.4. Dino Turtle. I'm just coming up with things on the fly as I go. Really have no idea what we're going to be doing for this character. Since we already saved the previous textures, we can also save another texture. You can do as many textures as you want. If you have a whole bunch of designs that you can swap out, that's how you would do it. You could even have all of these on one texture, and then the UVs will just be grabbing the location of the right texture in the file. That would save us more texture space if we did it that way. Either way is fine. I could probably make a video on that if that's requested. If not, I'll just continue doing whatever I was doing. This is like a draft version of character 3.4. This will be the colors, and I decided to select these faces on the bottom of the arm and the leg. I want to fill it in with a darker color to give it somewhat of a shadow to the character. I've been experimenting with adding shadows to my character in areas where I feel like there would be a shadow because there's not much light touching those areas, especially in the crevice right there and also at the bottom of the character. Mainly the light would be in a specific location. Most of the time I'm thinking of it as the light source is above the character. That's why there's always going to be shadows on the bottom or even the shadow in the middle. I'm just experimenting with different colors on where I think would be best for creating this character. There wasn't really much shading as much on the sketch. There is based on the 2D sketch. The light source, you can see where I put the arrow is coming from the top. That's why you have shadows on the inside of the arms and on the outside of the bottom of the arms and also under the head a little bit. If we did it through Blender with like procedural way, it would probably be much easier. I just haven't gotten to that point where I learned that process just yet. I'm pretty sure I could do it through Blender with a bunch of nodes and do a procedural way and possibly bake it into a texture. But I haven't gotten there yet. I haven't gotten to the point where I want to come back and polish a character. That's what I'm waiting for. I'm just going through as many characters as possible and seeing which one I'm super excited about. The one that gets me excited, I'll continue to build out that game, build out that process, record all those videos, and then just go through the entire workflow process of the entire game and try to complete the game. When we finally get to the point where I'm going to color the character, like actually spend the time to create some more high quality textures to actually bring out how the character looks like. If I were to spend a little bit more time polishing it, then that would be pretty cool. I have a character in mind that I've been working on. Whenever we get to those videos, that's going to be pretty exciting because I'm going to need to narrate the entire thing. That one's going to be a good one. I have a whole bunch of these characters that I want to get through. We're going to be able to see all that. Just save your designs for the texture. We have 3 textures that we saved. There's a plain one, the original one that I drew squares on, and then this one with the new shell that we just created. This is character 3.4, Dino Turtle. We just finished texture painting. That brings us into Rigify, so we can start rigging this character and create some bones. This is going to allow us to start getting into animation. You can see he no longer has just 2 paws. He has 2 legs now as well. You don't have to follow the sketch to the T. You can just use it as a guideline for your characters. As you go, just create things along the way. If it makes sense, definitely add it to your character. That's what I did. This is pretty much a pretty cool, interesting character now. Definitely way different than the ones that I've been making. Much more or less abstract. Still a combination of things, but I think it's pretty cool that I was able to create the 3D model for character 3.4. What we're going to do this time is we're going to change it up. I normally add a single bone and we delete it so we can do the Rigify, but also there's other bones that you can use in Blender. There's like different animals, there's the human bones, but for this I decided to use the wolf. These are like presets within Blender that's provided. All these bones work if you decide to generate the rig. I'm dragging this down, check in front, and then just align it into place. I chose the wolf bones because it has 4 legs, the tail, the spine, and some face bones. If you understand how the anatomy works, it's pretty much similar to my character. It's not a wolf, but pretty much we have 4 legs and pretty equivalent to the wolf structure. So we can definitely use it. You just gotta be creative with how you use your bones. Just think of the different use case. Instead of thinking about it as, oh, I can only use it with a wolf character, you can just think of it as, I can use this for any 4-legged character with a head. Just align the bones as best as you can based on what you think the bones should be placed for your character. When you select it, you can see what each of the bones are and how they were labeled at the top left. This part's a little bit tricky because you gotta be in X-ray mode to see where all the bones are. Just try to align it as best as you can. It's much better to use the Rigify samples separately so that you understand how the bone system works before you start using some of these presets. You might get confused aligning everything just because when there's a lot of things on the screen, people tend to have anxiety and then get stressed out and not know what to do. That's why I suggest just do what I did in the previous videos, where you just messed with one of the rig samples, like using a spine and then connecting it with like a neck and the head. Just start playing with less bones first and then move your way up to where I moved it to using the wolf bones right now. Now I understand how like the bone systems work. You can actually align everything now, like I am here. Everything just makes more sense looking at it now. I've been using Rigify for a very long time so far. Everything just starts clicking after a while. You spend all this time learning how the bone system works and generating the rigs and then doing all these animations. You actually start to pick up a little things. I start to delete some of the bones in the face because I felt like I don't need face bones as much this time. It's not really an issue because I can always add in a different Rigify sample if I wanted to. I wasn't really familiar with the face bones just yet, so that's why I deleted it. It's good to continue to rotate around your character in every perspective to make sure you have everything aligned in every direction. Just makes more sense. Just move things down. Sometimes when you move things, you might notice that some of the bones are supposed to be connected, similar to how we connect the bones using Shift S. What I do is just select that entire joint and move it down together. That just makes everything much easier. Or you can just do it the original way, where we select it and bring the cursor with Shift S and then move the selection to the cursor. Whichever way works. There's always multiple ways of doing things. Here I'm aligning the tail. You can see how the structure is for my character. With these preset bones, it just makes it easier to use them. Add on top of it any other Rigify sample bones. If we needed more bones, that makes it easier than doing everything one by one. That's why I started to experiment with the preset bones. It gives me much more time to work less on coming up with the bones and just focus on aligning the bones that are available for us to use. In pose mode, if you select each bone and try to see what the rig type is, but you have to go into object mode to actually see how they name the Rigify layer names. That's why I wanted to use this system as well, because everything's already named for us. Having to always rename your Rigify layer names got a little bit tedious. It's just so much easier to just add the default bones that they have for us to use. It's already created for us with different layer names, different bone groups, different rows. It's just easier to just do that, align it to our character, and then just generate the rig. Removing the face bones was fine. That's why we didn't really need it. Always experiment by generating your rig and seeing what happens. Now, when I generate the rig, you can see that the rig is actually facing the incorrect direction. So that's most likely because I rotated it earlier on and didn't apply all transforms, possibly. You can always press undo if that happens to you. I just pressed undo again. I went back into edit mode so that we can add the super head. We're going to need some bones for the head of our character just to have some sort of simple movements when we have the Rigify layers available for us in the generated rig. What we need to do to connect the spine bone is select the top endpoint of the spine bone, press Shift S, cursor to selected, and it brings the cursor there, and then press the endpoint for the neck that we just added, and then selection to cursor, and that's how you connect it. Just align the head and neck. The head and neck is pretty much the same thing. It's just connected to each other. That's why I use it interchangeably when I say head and neck, but you guys understand based on the video. You can go in and rename these layer names. If you've been using a naming convention, that's much more easier for you to remember. Just remember to move everything correctly on their separate rows. You have to move it into the correct layers as well. It's much faster to do it this way since everything's already set up for us. I generated the rig once again. I didn't even fix the direction of the rig. What I did was just select the rig, rotate it 90 degrees, and then hid the reference. Now we can focus on the character and the rig. Bring the rig in front, move them into character 3.4 collection, hide our bones. We don't need that at the moment anymore. You can see this was much faster to set up for Rigify versus how I've been explaining it in my previous videos. Definitely check those videos out. I've tried my best to be very informative and very detailed about how I generated my rigs and created the bones from scratch from the beginning. Definitely check out those videos. Let me know what you think. Hopefully you guys learned something. Please like this video as you go. Now that we have this generated rig, go into pose mode and you can see all the color coding is already set up for us. Super easy. If you use preset bones that's provided by Blender for different animal body types, you can experiment however you like. In object mode, it looks like these Rigify layers weren't aligned for the rig, so I just move it in the y-axis. Looks like tail is actually a little crooked as well. This definitely happens where the rig doesn't actually come out correctly sometimes. That's because probably how the bones are aligned. So it's very important to align your bones as best as you can. Otherwise, the rig will come out very odd, just like that. If that happens, you most likely have to remove your rig, go back to your meta rig, and try to align everything as best as you can. You can see I didn't do a very good job. That's why everything is placed out of order. But that's because I was just trying to generate it as quick as possible. I'm going to be doing that most of the time, just trying to get through the process as quick as possible because I don't want to spend way too much time getting it perfect. But for this, it's good for the video to show that it's good to align your bones. Otherwise, your rig comes out a little weird. That's going to be a problem when we parent them together for animation. You definitely want both sides to be somewhat similar in distance. That way, everything is symmetric. I should have used the symmetry as I moved my bones. That way, I only have to move half of them. But I didn't think of that. I also didn't really use the symmetry in Blender for that reason. I've only seen it in like recent videos where people are doing it and I was like, I didn't even think of it that way. Good thing I'll try it in the future video. Once you have your bones better aligned this time around, now you can generate the rig again. I normally just generate the rig. If I don't like it, I'll just press undo. I'm not going through the process of like deleting all the objects and stuff. I just have a specific way of working, and whatever simplifies the process is how I'm going to be doing it. For this, I didn't figure out at the time how to get the rig to generate the correct direction. I'm always having my characters facing whatever direction, even if it's incorrect, but I mean, it doesn't really bother me. I just rotate things to fit the character anyways. I rotated the generated rig. This time the rig is much more symmetric and we just need to center it. This is going to help with the animation for the character later on. Back in object mode, select the character, shift select the rig, and actually we forgot to move the head bones to their correct layers, I believe. I think that's what I was doing. The head bone needs to be in the first layer. The tweak layers, we have to move to the second layer, which is what I did for the head bones. Regenerated the rig, selected the character, shift select the rig, press Ctrl P so we can parent them together with automatic weights. On pose mode, all we have to do is grab these specific rig layers and just move them around. That way we can start getting into animation. The thing is, I forgot to join the objects into one. We have separate body parts. That's why you saw part of the arm moving without the front feet or paw. Before we do that, I always duplicate the collection so that I have a backup of everything as separate objects. Just rename it as separate or whatever is easier for you to remember. Now we can actually just select all the separate objects and join them together into one. I normally just leave it as body. Just makes everything so much easier to remember. With the body, you can select it, then shift select the rig, and then parent these two again with automatic weights. Now when we move the front paw, it moves together with the body because we joined everything. This is the reason why it's good to use leg bones, because when you grab the bottom of the leg bone, it's like sliding in place with your character and it keeps your character somewhat grounded. It works with the Rigify layers and also the IK and FK system pretty well. That just makes the animation feel much more natural for your character, even though your character is a made-up character, just like mine, but it looks pretty cool doing it this way. I don't know what I was doing here. I think I was trying to fix the geometry on the hands and paws or something like that. Let's see. So in sculpting mode, you can turn on Dyntopo, or you can remesh your geometry by adjusting the voxel size. And just pressing remesh. It's going to take some time. This is something to experiment when you have the time to experiment with high quality characters. This one I wanted to do it, but I think my system crashed when I was remeshing it. That wasn't good. I had to reopen Blender, remesh again. I'm experimenting with 0.05 as the voxel size when we remesh. It's always good to pay attention to the vertices, faces, and triangles on the bottom of the screen when you do this process. It pretty much combines your separate objects into one for the geometry of your character, but that didn't really look good for the voxel size, so you have to experiment with that value. I haven't really played with this too much, so this is all experimental. I don't have a lot of knowledge with this. That's why I don't really show much about this process, but I was experimenting with this character because why not? So you can see what happens when I'm trying different values as I remesh my character. It doesn't really turn out how I wanted it to. I think the higher the number goes, the less it looks more high quality or more detailed. The less number I use, the more high quality it gets, but it doesn't really help my character actually. That's why I was like, let's not continue with that process because I have no idea what I'm doing. I need to spend more time learning about that process. I just wanted to try it just to try and then see what happens. I just continued to go back to the original way and just keeping my character the way it is. It's perfectly fine the way it is now. I just wanted to experiment it. I selected the feet and the body so we can join them together. When I joined it, my character looks a little bit weird. The mirrors are misplaced pretty much. So that's why it looks a little bit odd, overlapped like this. We have to apply the mirrors in the modifier section before we always join. I always forget to do that because I don't realize that I'm mirroring half of the shape to the other side. Make sure to do that. I'm selecting the mirror modifier, pressing the check button for the body, and then also the front feet and also the back feet. And then now you can join all the objects together. One thing I found is selecting the feet first, selecting the body last, and then joining them together will just join all the objects into the body object. If you do it the opposite way where you select the body and then the feet, you'll end up having to rename the feet to body again. Back into the remesh section in sculpt mode just to see what we can do. I think we had to join the objects first to even experiment with what remesh does. You can see if we use a voxel size of 0.1 and then press remesh, you can see how it combined our paws with our body and tries to give us a geometry that includes both of those areas. It looks pretty good, but it could be better. I feel like my design, of course, looks so much better if you're comparing where the paws are and how it did the remesh, and then around the crevice area of the legs and the arms. It's much more detailed the way I did it. Now let's just decrease the value for the voxel size to 0.05. This looks much more detailed, keeping our detail, but also combining the vertices around the arm and the body. This is how you would do it for combining different parts of your 3D model into one model to keep the topology within the same object. You just need to experiment with the numbers. The lower the number, I guess the more high quality meshes you get. Be careful with the remesh option. It increases the amount of faces, vertices, and triangles. You can see this at the bottom of the screen, but it increases the amount of those. So be wary of that. The lower the amount you use, the more high quality it is. 0.03 looks actually pretty good. You can see how it took my low poly 3D model and created a more high quality model, keeping the shape but combining both of the feet and the body. 0.01 definitely will give us a way high quality 3D model. If I did decide to use this, this would be pretty damn cool. But you can see it actually increased the vertices and faces by huge amounts. That's something to be very wary about. There's really not much difference with the way I created my 3D model if we're going to be using it as a prototype character versus the more high quality ones. It really depends on, I guess, what game engine you use. I'm using Buildbox, so it needs much more simpler 3D objects. But I wanted to just experiment a little bit with the remesh option. I know it will definitely help out the 3D model. Also, this would be pretty cool content for the videos. I haven't really talked much about this. I really like to learn new things, try to experiment with my own characters, try to learn something new in Blender with each character. That way, I'm continually trying to learn as I'm going. It might be super helpful for other people. If you've been following my content, you'll know that I've been working on a lot of characters. It's always good to showcase what I can do with the amount of time I have. Also be super educational about how to make your own characters. This is the first time I'm actually using the remesh option. This looks pretty good. What was the value that I chose for this. I don't know if I kept this as the final. The value I chose was 0.02 and then did a remesh. That gives us at least a decent amount of vertices and faces. It increases that amount, but it's okay since we only have one character. I don't know if I actually use this particular one. We'll see throughout the video. But yeah, look at how this 3D model looks like. It's actually very, very good. If you do this, this messes with the UVs that you already created. That's why you see how my character turned all black again. It's not gray anymore. Now we have to go into UV editing to see what happens to the character and the UVs. You can see the topology on the character is actually pretty good. Much more subdivisions. There's a lot of vertices on this character. We don't have our seams anymore. If I did reuse this, I would need to recut the UVs and mark the seams over again. But since we have so much vertices and edges, this is going to be somewhat difficult to try to create new UVs for, unless I just did it right down the middle. In areas, sometimes there isn't just a middle line for the character. That's why I didn't go directly across. I'm trying to create my own seams. You can see the topology on this new remeshed 3D model. It's much more detailed. This would definitely really help with high quality textures. I was trying to figure out how to bevel the middle so that we can create a solid line, but that was a little bit tricky. I think I just reverted back to the original way by just pressing undo. That just gives us back our character that we were working on. This already has the UVs nicely cut for us. Sometimes it's just easier to use whatever prototype you came up with. I was just trying to find a more alternative way to maybe create a high quality version of character 3.4. That was all experimental and I don't really use it. That's what I normally do. I think of things and I try it and I'm like, it actually works. When I try to use it, how I normally would use it, it's adding on to my workflow. That's going to give us less time to build it into BuildBox or whatever I'm using. So then I'm actually spending more time trying to make the character perfect, which is normally something that I don't want to do. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the character just yet because we're not polishing it. We need to get through the entire process of creating the character and getting it to our game mechanic so we can start thinking of the game mechanic. You just have to try to fast track yourself and not be very tedious, not try to be a perfectionist on every little detail. Our character is already pretty good to use. Stick with whatever works at the moment so you can start getting the idea across. Now we're back to the original 3D model of character 3.4, Dino Turtle. I should have actually kept a backup of that version, but I didn't. But we know the settings and I can always revert back to it if I needed to. I have to recombine everything again. Probably this is the backed up version. That's always good to have a backup version of your character. And then you can always revert back to the original way. Since the remesh version did work, I actually wanted to combine the bottom of the body where the arms are and also the feet with the separate feet. So that's why I'm selecting these faces at the bottom. We only really need to combine a little part of those two for it to work with our character. I'm selecting these faces on the bottom. And if you press P, you can actually separate those faces by selection, and that separates that part from the body. As you can see, as I hide the body, we kept the bottom of it separate. That's the area that I want to remesh with the front feet and the back feet. By selecting those three separate objects, we can join those areas. That way we can actually remesh this bottom portion of the character without having to worry about messing around with the entire body. Now back into sculpting. For the bottom, we can remesh this area only, keeping the upper part of the character. That's probably a much smarter way that allows us to keep the portion that already looks good. The bottom portion, we want to at least make the geometry the same. So now we have to experiment with different values to see which one works best. Try like 0.02 remesh. Sometimes it won't look good, sometimes it will. You just have to experiment to see what happens. When I remesh, there's always like transparent areas, which is incorrect actually. Sometimes my thought process works, sometimes it doesn't, but I wanted to at least experiment and see what we can do about this area. We're combining two different separate objects and they don't really match much. I was just trying to find an easier way to work with the mesh, but then I'll get some of these weird errors or weird ways of how it turns out. I should actually figure out how to use the remesh option, or the reason why it comes out like this. I haven't spent too much time on it. I mean, I should. It seems pretty helpful. It just looks like every time I'm pressing remesh, it just gets rid of our geometry. As I'm continually pressing it at 0.01, you can see it's starting to diminish away. I don't know if it's because I'm using it incorrectly, or maybe that's just how I'm not supposed to be using it. I'm honestly just trying to smooth the areas right here. When we animate, it lifts off that area with the paw. I just wanted everything to fit nicely together. I'm just using the snake hook tool to move it closer together to hide these little crevices. Again, I'm not very experienced with sculpting, so that's why I try not to use it. I haven't learned that portion yet. That's gonna just take a lot of time, but we need to get back on track with rigging. So select the character, shift select the rig with automatic weights by pressing Control P. Just grab this foot IK area. You can see when we move it forward and move it back, it looks like he's sliding his feet. We grab the head, move it up and down. He has this nice head bobble. The eyes aren't connected again because the eyes are separate when we parented the rig. That's why the eyes aren't moving. That's why I always join all the objects first. Just makes everything so much easier so we can focus on animation. Now that we have everything in one object, everything just moves so much better with the rig. I really like how everything is grounded with this rig that we used from the Wolf rig in Blender. You can see I'm having a lot of fun grabbing all these rig layers for character 3.4 Dino Turtle. I'm just moving a whole bunch of rig layers this time to see what kind of cool animations we can create. Remember, I always go with idle animation. I think this rig is going to go perfectly well with this character. And that's going to bring us into the animation portion of this video. Now we have character 3.4 rigged and ready for animation. I select my animation tab, which is the one I use all the time now for my animation purposes. We have the left side where the action editor is going to be. This is showing us the summary of all the different movements that we're going to be doing with the Rigify layers. At the bottom, we have the timeline, so we can scrub through each of the keyframes that we add. On the right side is where we select all the different rig layers so we can move them around, see what we're working with, so we can start creating our animation. That's how I've been having it set up for my animation windows. For the view, that's really been helpful, seeing that all over on the screen. I like how there's different tabs in Blender and you can switch between different views for different purposes. Like blocking out, I like to have the entire layout so I can have as much room as possible to create separate objects. I have UV editing for creating my UVs and then selecting my UV. The UVs will be on the left side with the texture, and then on the right side will be where I select and mark my seams. And you have texture paint where I have my window on the top left for seeing how the textures are being placed on top of my characters. At the bottom left, I have our UVs that we created, but also our textures, and we're seeing how the textures are being placed in the texture file. On the right side is actually where I select all the faces that we're going to be painting, and switching between object mode, edit mode, and texture paint on that screen. Those different windows are super useful in Blender. It's just like different ways of viewing things in Blender. It seems complicated at first, but if you think in the most simplest terms, just separate each view based on your workflow. As you move down the workflow, that's just how you're going to create your characters or whatever you're going to be doing in Blender. I do need to remove some of these tabs at the top, because some of them I don't really use. I just keep it there just in case. If I want to experiment with other different processes in Blender, it's good that they have those preset tabs. But I'm thinking people have their own tabs working in Blender, like how I've been adding the new tabs, like the texture paint tab and the animation tab. For the animation for character 3.4, Dino Turtle, I'm just trying to figure out what's actually going to look good. It's funny if you just grab a whole bunch of rig layers and move it around and just have fun with it. You'll find that certain things start to make sense on how the rig works. Like they all move together very nicely. If you stretch them out like I do with this shell, Looks a little bit funny, looks a bit goofy. You can see how some of the things aren't stitched nicely at the bottom. Try not to move your animations or your wrigglers way too much out of the way. Otherwise, you'll get these discrepancies in your character. So I try to move it very little just to get the animation across, and that hides our imperfections. You won't really know that some parts aren't stitched nicely together unless you have to go in and make a high quality animation. For now, we just need a simple one. That's perfectly fine. If I go into edit mode for my character, select everything. If you press M, I think that's what I'm pressing, and you merge by distance, this actually merges your vertices that are overlapping each other, because sometimes you can't see if there's overlapping vertices. That's how you would do it. At the bottom, it will tell you it removed 47 vertices by that option. If you do it again, it'll tell you it removed 0. That's how you know if it worked on what you did. I do this occasionally when I create my 3D models. There's going to be some random vertices that you can't see because they're being overlapped. Even though you go into X-ray mode and you try to look for certain vertices, you can't really tell because they're in the same position. You don't know if there's like 2 or 3 right on top of each other. That's how you would do it. Actually, merging the vertices helped because it helps with our animation and moving the rig layers. Earlier, when I pulled this torso area up, it stretched out the bottom of the character. But now, since we merged those vertices, it actually works much nicer when we stretch our character and move it with the torso like this. I'm just trying to figure out a up and down movement for the character. I think animation is pretty fun when you're animating your own characters. You can definitely use them as much as you want. Just any type of head bobs and moving in place, up and down, I feel is pretty funny. If your character looks funny, everything you do just turns out pretty funny. My character has a very goofy, derpy face, so it works out. Normally in the animation part of this process, I move the shortcut to the left side so that we can see a lot of what I'm doing with the hotkeys, because I have to bring out the window on the right for the different buttons to turn off the different rig layers. That's why I have to move the hotkeys on the left side. So that way everything is on the screen. We can actually see everything as I record and just don't have to worry about explaining much of it. It's already being recorded on the left side, and we have a whole bunch of buttons on the screen that we can work with. Always at the 0 frame, get the rest pose of that position. There's no movement. We haven't really done anything. But the frame 0, that's what we keyframed. With I at the 5th frame, I moved it up by 0.05. You can see the values I'm typing on the top left, right under where the pose mode is, or right above it, I guess, because it gets replaced. At the 10th frame, I'm moving it down by 0.05. So that's why I type in the negative 0.05. That's pretty much how I do animations. I'm just typing in values, usually 0.05 or like 0.1 to get up and down movements. Usually what I do for idle animations, and that's how I animate the character, just using those values. You can always change it if you want, but the way I do it is just super simple. That's just standard for me. I'm just trying to get the idea across of bobbing up and down or moving up and down, and that works. By frame 15, I'm moving it down again by negative 0.05. At the 20th frame, we move it to 0.05 again. Now we can actually just scrub through to see how that looks. It's like moving in place, all of its body. It's like a nice bob in place. Once you have your sequence, which is what I think of for the frames from 5 to 20. Those 4 keyframes you can duplicate to create a loop in your sequence. Think of it as a pattern in your timeline. That's how I think of it. I duplicated it and put it to 25 all the way to 40 keyframes. I was supposed to finish the animation by duplicating it again for frame 45 to frame 60, but then I started on the next animation. This is how you have complex animations. You start with one of the rig layers first, create some sort of movement, and then move on to another rig layer so that you're adding on to the animation based on different parts of the body. That's how you're supposed to be animating in Blender, I believe. Doing everything one by one, then adding until you get a final complex animation that makes sense for your character. At least that's how I think about it. It might be the right way, it might be the wrong way, but who knows? It just works the way I'm doing it. If it works, right? For frame 0, get the keyframe of the rest position, no movements. At the 5th frame, move it up by 0.05. 10th frame, move it down by 0.05 by putting a negative 0.05, or you could even move it up again. It really depends on what you want to do. You can type in values to see the positioning works for you. At the 15th frame, I put a negative 0.05, so that means that we're moving it down. 20th frame, we'll move it back up. That's how I think of sequences, and then we can just duplicate those 4 keyframes to create another loop. Duplicate it again to complete the loop. We pretty much had the same 3 sequences in this entire 60 keyframes. That makes our full animation for the neck. Now I go back to the torso because I didn't finish duplicating the second sequence to create the third sequence. That completes our animation for the torso area now. Now we can actually just press play to see how this animation is. I actually like how Rigify worked with the rig layers and stuff. It makes the animations seem very realistic for the character. It's like just in place, very grounded and just like bobbing, moving up and down. This actually looks pretty cool for the character. It works really well for an idle animation. I really liked how that animation came out. I don't know if I added on to it, but that's what I remember for the animation. Once we have the animation that we like in the action editor, we'll need to rename it so that we remember what this animation was. Just call it character 3_4 underscore idle animation. That's the naming convention I've been using for my previous characters, since we have other characters in this Blender file for character set number 3. That way we can keep making as much animations as we want, and they will be separated like this. I like this animation. It's pretty cool, very unique, never seen before. Also, we could always reuse these bones and also this rig on any other 4-legged animals or reptiles or characters that we have. That's pretty cool for different use cases. If I have a whole bunch of animations, I can just reuse it for my different characters. That's what I've also been considering for a lot of my characters, but I've been using a lot of Mixamo animations, a lot of ways to create pretty cool characters with their animations. And I'm just getting started. There's a whole bunch of things to learn in Blender. I don't have that much time, so I'm just trying to learn the most important parts where I can create a foundation for my games. Like getting the prototype and the beginning portion of the development of your game is super important. That defines how you spend most of your time later on throughout the entire process. I want to know at least how to make the most basic version of my game, with the creation of the character, the creation of the story, creation of the gameplay, creation of little different things that create the final pieces of a full game. Once you know that, you can just continue to learn more in-depth stuff like polishing and then figuring out how to make your game better with different analytic tools and stuff like that. I always think about the foundation. Always try to get your foundation right. If your foundation is super rocky and you don't know much of building a full game, that's going to be a problem. You're going to run into a lot of problems throughout the entire process, and if you don't know what to do from the beginning, that's going to be a huge issue. That's something I want to avoid, since I'm creating the games myself now, being the artist, attempting to be just a developer myself, doing a lot of no code and creating the games I want to create. It's going to be a little bit tricky, but at the same time, I think it's going to be fun being able to acquire all of those skill sets all at once. And then I won't have to worry too much about hiring devs and artists unless I really need to when I want to like scale my game business. But we're not there yet. I'm going to take things slowly this time and just build my new skill set, learn a whole bunch of new things, and see where we go from there. Now that we have the idle animation for character 3.4, Dino Turtle, I'm actually rotating around the character. Since we've only been working on one side of the character, I didn't really check around the other side of the character. I noticed that half of his shell went missing. Like, when did that happen? I have no idea. You know, when you're working in Blender, when there's a lot of stuff to do, you're trying to make sure everything is perfect. You get to a point where you're like, all right, I didn't make any mistakes. Everything's been working correctly as it should. And then you come across an area where it's like, when did this even happen? And how come I didn't stumble upon it until the end, almost the end of the workflow? So sometimes this bugs me, but this half shell actually is somewhat unique. I think it's funny, but I could have actually kept it like this. He could have just been a half shell Dino Turtle. I should have actually kept a backup of this, but I can always delete half of the shell anyways. Now that we have this issue, I need to go back and fix it. We've already created the animation with this rig, so I didn't want to delete it it. If we delete it, we won't have the animation anymore. What we need to do is separate 3D model from the rig by clearing the parent. You can do that with Alt P. That probably happened because I didn't apply my mirrors for the shell when we joined the character. But good thing we have a backup of the shell. It's always good to save backups of your character. That's going to be very useful. Just save backups of everything that you do. You can always revert back to whatever you messed up on. You're definitely bound to mess up and then you have nothing to return to. That's why I'm very precise about having backups for every little thing that I do so I can revert back at any time and not worry about it. We need to delete this half shell. Now he's super naked with no shell. That could actually be a character design. One with a no shell, so he's like super naked, and then one with the shell. Various things you do with your character. It's pretty fun to come up with different ideas and then try to use them in your different games. I think it's super fun coming up with a whole bunch of stuff. And it's pretty random too, like the ideas that I come up with. It's pretty out there. This character at least makes sense, but it's unique. That's something that I really find fascinating, with the power of the mind to actually be creative and imagine some wild stuff with a whole bunch of information that we've learned on the internet or whatever, cartoons or different things that you've learned and acquired through visuals. You just kind of come up with things. That's the whole fun part about this entire creative process. Once we have the shell again, we just need to join it with the body, select the 3D model, shift select the rig, Control P, parent with automatic weights. Now we have our rocking up and down animation. Character 3.4 with his full shell now. We actually messed up parenting the rig to the character because it wasn't aligned, probably got misaligned during the parenting process. So this is what happens. I'm just trying to rush through and finish this character. Things just always get messed up. So then we have to clear the parent again, move the rig in place, aligning it as best as we can, and then just parent it again with automatic weights. This animation is a thing of beauty that you get to rewatch over and over again. And since I've been working with idle animations, I'm very familiar with that process where I just create the up and down movement using values or just experimenting with manual values. I started adding on the walk animation so we could start creating that cycle and understanding how that process works. There's a bunch of different animation cycles that you can learn, but simple versions is what I'm going to be going with for my characters. That's what I think of as a second animation. We always need a walking animation so our character can move around our game, if that's the game I decide to choose for my characters. We duplicate our idle animation, which makes it easy. It brings over the keyframe animations we've already worked on for the different rig layers, like the neck and the torso. And if we wanted to, we can just mute these rig layers so we can keep them if we want to add on to it for the walk cycle. But I just delete them. Maybe I want a more unique animation for the walk animation, but it's entirely up to you. You can always decide that throughout the entire process of adding on or just making something much more unique. Really is up to you for the entire creative flow. Just be creative and experiment. See what happens. Try to come up with something cool that brings your character alive, like how I am. Like, all of this is all experimental. I have no ideas what I'm doing for the character. I'm just going with the flow, seeing what happens. And I have my music on. Whatever I recorded is whatever I came up with. That's the cool part of the entire process. It seems like I know exactly what I'm doing, but I don't. Even with the entire narration process, I have no idea what I'm going to be talking about. But I'm just watching these different things happening with my characters that I made. And then I'm just narrating what's happening on top, but also things that's coming to mind as I record these videos. That's how I record the content. When I start putting this stuff out, I'll start getting feedback on whether my narration has been getting better or I should probably be doing more tutorials or something. There's multiple ways that I could be narrating this, but I want to just do more of like a devlog narration process, thought process. I want to record that in case I come up with something that's important that might be useful for my characters. I can have a reference point for my videos, and then I don't have to remember what I talked about or look for it because I already have the video somewhere and I just need to rewatch what I talked about. The walk cycle is something I needed to figure out. I should use use references for this, but in my head, I'm just thinking we'll just move one of the feet first. Like you just move it forward, move it back, try to get that movement, and then incorporate any other movements that you think should be happening. I'm just trying to be creative for my own character and try to work with the tools that are available. On the right side with these tools, you can switch between IK and FK. I forget the definition actually, but normally I think people use IK for legs and then FK for feet. But if you switch between the two, it gives you a different movement on how you can move your characters. I should experiment more with this, but I haven't really looked into it much more deeply. I really try not to read much of the definitions. I like to be hands-on. I like to just go in, see what happens when I move certain things, decide from there how I'm going to use it, and then I just continue to use it as I see fit. That's how I do most of my animations, actually. That's part of my creative flow. Everyone's going to be doing it differently. If this doesn't really work for you, I would try to find someone who has a framework that you like. Otherwise, you're going to be going in circles watching my content. Also, this is entertaining, seeing how I would create a game from scratch. I think that's the cool part, is that everyone thinks differently on how to approach things. You might find some good nuggets in my videos that might be applicable for your games and your characters, but you might not. If you continue to watch my videos, I'm pretty sure one of these is gonna click for you. Maybe you will just create your own game in your own characters. I mean, why not, right? It might spark a whole bunch of different ideas, and it's just fun. Always have fun with what you do. Otherwise, what's the point, right? You can tell I'm excited. Like, I'm excited about my characters. I think this entire process is pretty crazy of coming up with a sketch or doodle that could have just been thrown away in the trash. But let's just try to make some useful things with it, some fun things that people can play with, and see where we go from there. Why not? Why not? I'm at that age where I'm wanting to be a little bit more riskier, going with my ideas that I have. I'm trying to scratch that itch again. It's been quite some time. Plow through and get through as many characters in game as we can while I still have the energy. I'm still pretty young, so let's see how much I can get through my characters in game. For the walk animation, I don't know. I guess the timeline wasn't working at the bottom as I'm creating the movements. So I was creating the keyframe animations at the top. I don't even know what I'm talking about most of the time. I'm honestly just recording and talking, and we'll just stitch it together to create a pretty cool video. But the 0 frame, I got the rest position. I moved the front areas down a little bit because it wasn't really touching the floor. At the 5th frame, I move it forward by 0.15 keyframe, that position. We're working on one of the paws or the feet, however you can imagine it. At 10th frame, I'm moving it back. So I put negative 0.15. With those two keyframes, we can duplicate it to create our second sequence where it's kind of moving back and forth. And then we could duplicate it again to create another third sequence. You can see it's moving forward and it's moving back. That's how I had the movement in my head for a starting points of the walk cycle. I think we're working on both sides since there's 2 keyframes going on. You can actually work on left and right at the same time, keyframing both. That makes everything much more simpler. Since the movements were a little bit too fast, since we only have 60 keyframes anyways, or 60 frames for this animation, I decided to start separating the keyframes from the 10th to the 15th and moving it to the 20th frame. That way we have some sort of gap on the movement, and it actually slows down the walk cycle. So it's not like he's rushing, but just like slowly walking. That's why you would put gaps in your animation, so the movements would be much slower. Now he's just like rubbing the floor with his feet in the front. Oh, there's actually just 1 keyframe animation going on for the right foot. The top keyframes is just the summary of what you added, so I was looking at that wrong. Now we're working on the left side of the foot. At the 20th frame, I'm putting a 0.15, so that moves it forward. At the 30th frame, we move it back. I put negative 0.15. We pretty much just need those 2 keyframes, and we can duplicate that. At this time, I didn't really look at any references. I was just trying to figure it out on the spot. As a walk cycle, you're like alternating your arms or your feet. So that's what I was trying to figure out here, how to alternate between the movements. When the right foot is moving forward, we should actually be moving the left foot back. That's like the thought process here. We could just duplicate the 20th and 30th frame on the 40th and 50th frame, duplicate it again for the 60th frame and also the 70th frame. It looks like I'm extending it to possibly 80 frames for this character's animation for the walk cycle. You can see he's like alternating both feet. It's not really a walk cycle just yet. It's just alternating back and forth. I've actually never worked on the walk animation during this time. All our previous characters were all idle animations, or we did Mixamo, and that was already a preset. Creating your own walk animation is a little bit tricky for the first time if you've never done it before. This was the first time you're seeing me do it in Blender. It might not even be correct, but I think it turned out pretty well actually. Stay tuned for that. We're kind of like missing a keyframe at the 7th frame, and I delete that keyframe. It's a lot of trial and error, just experimenting, duplicating your keyframes, or just moving keyframes back and forth. If you want to just end your animation, like let's just say at 60 frames, make sure to click that to scene end button and it'll show the animation in your timeline only up to 60 frames. That way you can see if you have any discrepancies with your animation. If the loop is incorrect, you can actually fix it. It looks like my loop wasn't really looping correctly. When we actually end at 60th, all the way back to 0, there's something I needed to fix. You can always see the values on the right side by bringing the toolbar out. You can see where the values are increasing and decreasing, and then how it gets back to the loop. Like I said, when the right arm is moving forward, you should actually be moving the left arm back. That's just how you have to think about the animation. I needed to extend this again to the 70th frame. I'm just going back and forth, deleting keyframes between 60, keeping the entire keyframes up to 60, or keeping the entire keyframes up to 70. I'm trying not to make this confusing. I'm actually getting confused from the video, but the walk animations definitely get better with my future videos that I'll be narrating soon. I've gotten much better at the walk cycles. This was the first time I'm doing it, so bear with me. I'm seeing all the confusion on where my animations are. That's pretty much how I have it for the 0 to 60 frames of the front feet. We need to do the same thing for the back feet. I animated this separately. I could have just copied the keyframes from the front and pasted it into the back, but I didn't think of it at the time. I thought I had to do everything individually without needing to paste the keyframes. That's something you can do. You can copy keyframes from, I think, another animation rig layer and then bring it to the same layer. I think that works. I mean, the feet are pretty much the same, so it should work. For the back feet, it's like the same thing. When the right foot is moving forward, the front foot should be moving forward. That's how I thought of it. The 0 frame, we have it where the leg is forward by 0.15. At the 10th frame, I move it back, so negative 0.15. 20th frame, move it forward by 0.15. 30th frame, move it back by 0.15. 40th frame, move it forward by 0.15. 50th frame, move it back by negative 0.15. That's pretty much the sequence if you just think about it. For the loop on the 50th frame, I delete the keyframe, and then I just highlighted the 30th and 40th frame, just duplicated that. That's so much easier to finish the loop. It's pretty much the same thing. That's as simple as it gets for this character for the walk cycle. You can see it's like scrubbing back and forth. A walk cycle should actually be where you lift your feet as well. I don't know if I added into this, maybe I do, but I started with the most simplest mechanic and movement that I thought of. When you walk, of course you lift, but what is the movement if you just made the most simplest thing? Would be back and forth, right? But this time it would be forward and not up and down. That's how I thought of the walk cycle. At the 0 frame, the feet are supposed to be moving in opposite directions, so it can't be the same. That's why I deleted the keyframe at 0 and moved the sequence back so that the sequence is actually being altered. Just duplicate the keyframe on the 40th frame to complete the loop. Now we have this moving forward and back movement for the feet. That's as simple as it gets for the character. And then we need to complete it to the other side by selecting the left leg on the back leg, doing the same thing, moving it forward on the 10th frame by 0.15, on the 20th frame, moving it back by negative 0.15. And since we know that's the same sequence, we can just duplicate it. But remember that at the 0 frame, the feet are supposed to be moving in opposite directions, so it can't keyframe it at the rest position. Since we want to make this a little bit more fun, a little bit more complex for our animations. We could add some movement with the torso again. At the 10th frame, I moved it down, so we put negative 0.05. 20th frame, moved it up by 0.05. Duplicate the sequence from 10 and 20 for the 30th and 40th frame, and then also the 50th and 60th frame. Now with the walk movements, he's also moving his back torso area with the shell. That gives us a pretty cool movement, but he's a little bit stiffer on the neck. So we got that down with the movement of the feet and also the movement of the torso. Now we need some sort of head movement, like bobbing his head as he's walking. Grab one of these layers, so possibly the head layer is what I used. At the 0 frame, keyframe that position. 10th frame, move it down by negative 0.05. 20th frame, move it up by 0.05. Duplicate that sequence twice to complete the loop. Now we have this walking animation of character 3.4, Dino Head. He's supposed to be Dino Turtle, but Dino Head actually works too. Those are two names actually, Dino Head and Dino Turtle, that I can use for character 3.4. This is how I come up with ideas. Whatever I say is like the idea for the character, and then I decide later on what I think everything should be. I just talk and talk until ideas come out. That's what's going on with Dino Head or Dino Turtle. Let me know what you think of the names. If you have a better name, drop it in the comments. We'll see what I use actually. This is what I mean with the 3D models. Sometimes if your objects are separated and you move areas that are close to the separated objects, it just looks weird for your 3D model, and you don't want that in your games. That's why I try to do my movements as minimum as possible and just try to get the idea across until I get to the point where I get better at the entire like remesh option so that we can start connecting our models. I try to do less separate objects in my future videos so that every character has one body that's connected to everything around the different body parts. That makes the movements so much more fluent. I think I wanted to add a movement for the tail as well. See, it gets pretty fun when you get the movements down, especially with how everything works, working on the rig layers one by one and understanding that process that you do it one by one first and then keep adding on, and then it becomes a pretty complex animation. I've been talking about this in my previous videos as I've been getting better in my workflow process. See how I did it in all my previous characters. I did it very slowly until we got to this point to create the first walk cycle from scratch. That's pretty cool for character 3.4. With the tail, you can either do a movement left and right or a movement up and down. At the 0 frame, keyframed it at its rest position. 5th frame, I'm moving it down by negative 0.05. 10th frame, moving it up by 0.05. 15th frame, move it up by 0.05. That's breaking our sequence pattern that we've been doing. That's just to change it up, I guess. At the 20th frame, move it down by negative 0.05. That long sequence this time, we can just duplicate to finish the loop for the entire 60 frames. You can see this is actually pretty cool for the walk cycle. Like all the movements work together. You can see how the rig is actually moving based on the different colors of the different rig layers. This is pretty much how you create any animation you want in Blender. Just doing it one by one, taking it slow, utilizing the action editor and the summary to record your different keyframes for each rig layer, just scrubbing back and forth between the timeline to fix whatever movements you don't like. And then you have any animation that you want for any of the cool characters that you come up with. That's going to be the final animation that I chose for the walk animation. To complete everything, we're going to need to create the outline for character 3.4, Dino Head. I keep saying Dino Head, but Dino Turtle was the original name. I just like using the combinations of the two so that we know what they came from. And it's kind of unique across the character anyways. For the outline, I will repeat this for this character because I want this in the video. Sometimes I skip this part, sometimes I don't. For character 3.4, Dino Turtle, to create the outline, duplicate the body, rename it to outline. Under vertex groups, add an outline group. Under modifiers, add a mask modifier and a solidify modifier. Check flip normals, check high quality normal, change the material index offset from 0 to 1. In the material tab, add a second material. This is our outline material that has an emission and backface culling checked. Under shell vertex group in the modifiers tab, select your outline group. Under the mask modifier in the vertex group, select your outline group again. Move your solidify modifier above your mask modifier. Your outline should show. This time it doesn't. Now we have a black shell. That's funny. I decided to check the face orientation under viewport overlays. Interesting that the color is pink and purple. Usually it's blue and red. That's an interesting thing. See what happened. For the outline, it's pink and purple. But for the body, if you hide the outline, the body is actually blue and then our shell is red. We didn't actually flip the normals. So I deleted this outline process. I thought we were going to be finished, but we forgot to flip the normals for the shell. Select the shell, go into edit mode, select everything with A, select mesh, normals, flip. There's also like red faces on the upper part of the head. We need to flip those normals as well. Now that everything is blue, everything should be working correctly when we do the outline process. I can probably just reuse that audio because I'm not gonna redo the outline process again. That's the usefulness of recording everything first, because then you could just copy and paste, especially the audio over. I'm going to be doing that for this outline process. Hopefully it's like the same. It probably is. For the outline, I will repeat this for this character because I want this in the video. Sometimes I skip this part, sometimes I don't. For character 344, Dino Turtle, to create the outline, duplicate the body, rename it to outline. Under vertex groups, add an outline group. Under modifiers, add a mask modifier and a solidify modifier. Change the material index offset from 0 to 1. In the material tab, add a second material. This is our outline material that has an emission and backface culling checked. Move your solidify modifier above your mask modifier. Check high quality normal, check flip normals. To see the outline, we need to switch to material preview mode. And then we could just adjust the thickness a little bit more. The thin outline actually looks pretty good for this character, so entirely up to you, but I used 0.02. Now we can see the cool walk animation with the outline of the character. This looks pretty cool. Like, this character was definitely worth it for all the time that I spent for creating it. We actually ended up with some pretty cool animations for this character. It was a fun one to build, even though it was like super complex in the beginning. If you've been watching the entire video, you see how I created it. It's all visualization and just going with the flow, working with tools. We need to export the FBX. Go to File, Export FBX. Select the previous character's name, increment it to character 3_4. Check selected objects, select armature, select mesh, select Z forward, uncheck add leaf bones, uncheck NLA strips, and export. That pretty much concludes character 3.4, Dino Head or Dino Turtle, for the blender portion of the workflow, blocking out, UV unwrap, texture paint, Rigify, and the animation process. This entire process has been pretty fun for me. This character was one of the first that was actually unique, but also very symmetric. Thought the 3D model came out pretty well. Also, the first time I created the walk cycle for the walk animation. So that's pretty cool. We have 2 animations for this character, the idle animation and the walk animation. I really like this character. Let me know what you think. I've had fun narrating this video. I know I've been doing a lot more narrations where it's getting a little bit detailed, more thorough. So I have a lot more editing to do. I'm trying to not make a lot of mistakes, but I think these videos are going to be pretty fun when I actually drop them on the internet, and we'll see what the feedback is. I think these dev vlogs are pretty cool. I like to get my thoughts out and see if I come up with more ideas throughout the video. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I tend to just talk because I want to grab this moment in time, put it in the video form. What was I thinking of for this character? Possibly what was I gonna come up with for a game idea, or even whatever I was gonna do for the entire character where I'm gonna come back to it. So that's, I guess, the fun part about this creative process. I really don't know how it's gonna end up, and I'm fine with that. I'm just recording because it's fun. Also, I'm trying to build that habit into myself of making a video here and there a day throughout the week. If I can get as much videos done as possible, great. But you gotta build that habit every day where it becomes second nature. That's what I'm doing, building that muscle memory. I think I'm getting pretty better at it. If you've been comparing my videos as I started, I was a little bit nervous. I didn't know what the hell I'm gonna be talking about. I didn't know how I'm going to narrate, but now I have an idea. I'm just gonna be doing dev vlogs, coming up with ideas, talking as I go. If something comes to mind, I'll just say it. If it doesn't, I'll just think of something else. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Definitely check out the next video for the build box portion. Please like and subscribe. It's very important to me. I appreciate it all. Guys and girls, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I should say. But yeah, I appreciate your help. Hopefully this has all been educational. You've understand my thought process with the entire thing. I'm not a pro. I've just been building games for a very long time. So I know the process of how it goes. I'm trying to get my full game idea so I can expand and build that out and have everything documented. I think that'd be pretty cool. I've never done that before. Yeah, definitely check out the build box portion. I think I use a pretty cool mechanic that they have already as a preset and just have this character in there. Check out the next video. This is a long video, but we're making characters, we're making games the glitchy way, which is my way. Definitely check out the next video and peace out. Appreciate your time. You know what I'm saying? Let's go. I'm out.